What's going on YouTube? It's Tej back again with another video, and today I'm giving you one reason for hope for all 32 NFL squads. We'll follow it up later on this week with one reason for concern for each and every NFL team. So excited to bring this video your way. I love doing these kind of listicle videos, and especially this time of the year, we're all pumped for week one. Hopium is in the air, so I want to back that up, and I want to give you one reason each team should be excited about their chances going into this upcoming season. Let me hear your thoughts down below. What's the reason? If you're a Bills fan, you're pumped up for the season, or if you're a Bengals fan or a Rams fan, or whatever the case may be. Let me gear the number one reason for hope you have for your favorite squad, whether you're a Super Bowl contender or just a team looking to improve upon where they were last year. Love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments section. Be sure to hit that like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and want to see more football content like this. Let's go ahead, waste no more time. Let's jump right into it. Starting with the AFC East. I started with the Buffalo Bills, going with the secondary. We'll kind of tie into what I thought about doing this with actually the concern video, which sounds a little weird, but be sure to come back to that video and hopefully it will make a little bit more sense. I'm going to go with the secondary because at this point, they can't be any more banged up than they were last year. I mean, before week one, we're talking about Trey White down, having to start a pair of rookies, safeties missed a bunch of time throughout last year, obviously the Damar Hamlin situation on top of that, kind of further complicated that position group once you got into the postseason. So there was just so many injuries. And I don't say that it can't happen again, but odds are it can't be any worse than what it actually was. So I think this team already has so much working in its favor, and I think if the secondary gets that much better, the pass rush in turn will get that much better, and hopefully the return of Von Miller, that was something else I considered here, makes a huge impact. But I think if that secondary is healthy and is much closer to 100% than it was last year, this defense entirely gets better, and therefore the Bills are a better squad. The Dolphins, obviously it's a loaded roster, and that's kind of a cop-out answer. I tried to keep these a little bit more specific and a little less vague, like loaded roster. But man, I just look at the talent on both sides of the ball. Jalen Phillips, who I think is going to take a huge step forward this year. Ramsey's hurt, but once Jalen Ramsey's back, him plus Xavier Howard, you got to be excited about that. Plus Javon Holland, look, everywhere Vic Fangio's gone, safeties have had career years. Eddie Jackson in Chicago, Justin Simmons in Denver. I think Javon Holland might have a type of season where we start thinking about, hey, is he the best safety in football this year? So that's just the defensive side of the ball. And on offense, of course, you've got Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Tua, who was running that system awesomely prior to all the concussions that he had last year. Teron Armstead's a superstar left tackle when he's out on the field. You have just insane amounts of talent on both sides of the ball. And unlike the Rams, who maybe were stars and scrubs approach, got into a Super Bowl, even the weak spots for the Dolphins, I don't think are terrible, right? Their backfield isn't anything that you're writing home about, but man, it's plenty good enough for that offense. And even kind of a Mike White as okay, he's a backup, but not a bad one. He's actually probably one of the better backups in football. So they kind of have the star-studded, kind of upside of that, stars and scrubs approach, but with not as many scrubs as, some of the teams like the Rams and others have tried to do through previous seasons. So it's just a loaded roster. So obviously a lot of things to be excited about there for Miami fans. Patriots, I'll go Bill in that defense. Bill Belichick's already a defensive mastermind. He's going to be one of the first people that when you ask, casual fans or diehards, one of the best defensive minds of your generation, ready, set, go. Bill Belichick's going to be that answer for a lot of people. And his track record speaks for itself. It's the DC with the Giants before becoming the head coach of the Browns, and then, of course, the New England Patriots. So, it goes on and on and on for decades. So that's why it's he's going to be one of the first names that so many different people have to say and answer with. But you even look at that defense, right? Josh Uche's a great situational pass rusher. Matthew Judon has been really productive in that defense. The linebackers may not be anything that wows you on paper, but they played at a pretty decent level last year. Add Christian Gonzalez, Kyle Duggar, who I think is a breakout candidate. Second year for Jack Jones. You also still have Marcus Jones, Jonathan Jones there, who they got back on a pretty good contract free agency. There's a lot of talent on that side of the ball, and of course, Bill Belichick's mastermind. So, where there's a little bit of trepidation, what's that offense going to look like? I think if you're a Pats fan, you're feeling pretty confident that defense is going to be one of the best in the NFL. And the Jets, it's Aaron Rodgers. You could be excited about year two, Garrett Wilson for sure. Year two, Sauce Gardner. Can that defense double down on what it did last year? All that sort of stuff, but it's Aaron Rodgers because the Jets were the team this offseason, like the Broncos the year before, where it's man, give this team a quarterback, give them a legitimate quarterback, they could be Super Bowl contenders. And the Jets definitely landed one. And there's been two sides of this, kind of where I think Aaron Rodgers is washed, or I think Aaron Rodgers can bounce back now that he has weapons. I tend to find myself in the latter versus the former. I think that Garrett Wilson alone was better than anybody had in Green Bay last year, and that alone is going to make a huge impact. So I think Rodgers is in for a kind of revenge tour doing it in the Big Apple, and the Jets are going to become one of the best teams in football because of it. All right, moving on to the AFC South. Texans, kind of another cop-out answer here. Young talent. You can say that about just about any team going through a rebuild, right? But, we're seeing Will Anderson make some splash plays. C.J. Stroud, much better preseason game 2 than game 1. Tank Dell looks like an absolute stud after the one preseason game we've seen of him. And then, Jalen Petrie was awesome last year. Derek Stingley Jr. is a top 3 overall pick. There's so much young talent. It feels like where Houston's been the last couple of years has been frustrating, right? They've wanted to enter a rebuild, but they couldn't because of the Deshaun Watson kind of shadow looming over them, and they wanted to get the assets for him, and that was going to help kickstart this rebuild. Now we're in a spot where it's like those building blocks are now in place. Like DSJ should be a cornerstone of that secondary. Jalen Petrie was a playmaker last year. Will Anderson's hopefully that headline name across that defensive line. C.J. Stroud, you obviously hope is the franchise, QB of the future, and you want Tank Dell to be his number 1 guy. Now it feels like you actually have like players that in 5 years' time you will still be rooting for as the faces and foundation of this franchise. So that's got to be super exciting for Houston, even if they don't have like an above 500, winning record or anything like that this upcoming season. The Colts, I'll say Shaq Leonard's return. You could also say Anthony Richardson here, just because you're talking about QB of the future, and new coaching staff as well could certainly ignite that type of excitement. But I'll go Shaq Leonard because man, every time he's been on the field for the Colts, he's just been a true difference maker. And it feels like anytime they're in a close game, Shaq Leonard finds a way to make a big impact, to make a big play. And missing him last year felt like that was obviously a huge absence. And not to say Zaire Franklin, EJ Speed couldn't be fine enough on their own. I think they're good players, but Shaq Leonard's just got that knack to be able to go above and beyond and be the difference maker, again, to use that phrase, where he's just generating turnovers left and right. He's got a nose for the football and just comes up with those timely plays where the other guys are good, they do their job. Shaq Leonard goes that next level up. So going to be a huge addition back in that defense there for Indy. Jags, Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley. Obviously it was when Christian Kirk signed his contract in Jacksonville, it was a hot button issue for the NFL because it was like, wow, the wide receiver market is blowing up if Christian Kirk's making this much money. And albeit, I was one of the people saying that, he played worth that money, especially when you consider, hey, Kirk's making 18 a year. Well, Devontae Adams making 30. So that, proportionally speaking, that feels about right. But now, I think even Jags fans who like Christian Kirk, were happy about that signing and that addition, would tell you Calvin Ridley's a better player. So it's like, hey, we got to see what T-Law, we got to see him, turn a corner, take that step towards being a franchise superstar level guy. And, Christian Kirk was his one, and that was better than we thought. But now you got a legitimate number 1 guy. And you can play Kirk in the slot, Ridley on the outside. He's got big playability all through his career. And he's kind of the perfect deep threat for Trevor Lawrence. So that combination specific, I think, has got to have Jags fans excited. This team won the division, and now they have a legit number 1. How could you not be pumped for that? The Titans, D-Hop and Treylon Burks. This was kind of a tough team for this and the Cons, because I feel like I know who the Tennessee Titans are. We'll see. Obviously, you get into the season and 1,000 different things can happen. I've been plenty wrong on teams I thought I had a good beat on. But, things to be excited about. Definitely DeAndre Hopkins, right? Because I don't know how many Titans fans, if you asked them 3 months ago, were anticipating D-Hop being a member of their team. And, reports out of, Tennessee camp is he is that number 1 target. He is the volume guy for this offense that they needed. And then I think that makes Treylon Burks' assignment that much easier. A guy who did a lot of the slot at Arkansas, played outside some last year. I think Kyle Phillips would be nice if you can keep him in the slot, and Burks is comfortable playing out wide, but we'll see. But adding D-Hop gives you the flexibility to add Burks inside if you absolutely need to, or he is more efficient there. But it gives you just a nice 1-2 punch, and 2 guys who do it in different ways. D-Hop's a possession guy. Burks is a big, hard to bring down, yards after the catch machine. That's what made him kind of an interesting player coming out of the slot at Arkansas. They wanted to get him the ball as much as they could, and that was the easiest way for KJ Jefferson to kind of get him that. They also used him often on end arounds and things like that, and bubble screens and stuff. So Tennessee can kind of tap into him for some of those things that maybe you're not going to ask an aging DeAndre Hopkins to do anymore. So I think it could be a nice 1-2 punch there, and just a few months ago, again, without DeAndre Hopkins in the roster, I was still optimistic about Burks. But now him as the number 2 with D-Hop there, solidified veteran. I feel like I know what I'm going to get out of D-Hop. It makes me feel that much more optimistic that Burks can be a pretty good player going into year 2 as long as he's healthy. So that gives me a lot of excitement. And hopefully, I didn't have a huge win total for Tennessee, but hopefully by bringing in D-Hop and making the assignment that much easier for Treylon Burks, they'll be able to exceed my win total predictions, because I would actually really like to see that. Let me get on to the AFC West. For the Broncos, I feel like you got to go Sean Payton. Because if you're someone saying that Sean Payton and the Broncos are going to make the playoffs this year, I think you're saying that because of Sean Payton's presence and, how quote-unquote disastrous it was, with Nathaniel Hackett there, which I get, right? Like the time clock management was embarrassing. You have an entire stadium counting down the play clock. You can't have that type of stuff. So yeah, it was rough. But, and this is where I don't want to be too much of a downer in this upbeat video. I just don't know how much one guy is going to make a difference there. And a head coach can have a huge impact. We saw what Brian Daboll did last year in New York, and I think a lot of that credit belongs to him. We'll talk about him in just a moment when we get to the Giants. But I just don't know if Sean Payton's going to have quite that same effect. But if you are a Denver fan or if you're someone predicting the Broncos make the playoffs, I think he's the exact person you're looking to as the reason why they get there. Chiefs, we will be quick on this one. They're the defending Super Bowl champs. They won 2 of the last 3 Lombardis. And so much of that core is still intact. Mahomes, it's Kelsey. They've been able to kind of figure out that backfield after drafting CEH in the first round. The interior offensive line is still a massive strength. Swapping out tackles, we'll talk more about that in the concern video. Even the defense, Spagnuolo's a staple. L'Jarius Sneed has become, kind of a heartbeat of that defense. Nick Bolton going into year 3. Chris Jones, obviously one of the best interior defensive linemen, but now you got year 2 Karlaftis. You add another rookie edge rusher in Felix Anudike-Uzomah. It's just one of the best rosters in football. They won the Super Bowl last year. Didn't lose. I don't want to say anything major, but it's not like Mahomes left the building. It's not like Kelsey retired. So, yeah, Kansas City, you know why people are excited about the Chiefs. The Chargers, I got to go Kellen Moore. Kind of like the Sean Payton thing where it's like, if you're predicting the Chargers to lead the league in scoring or to win the AFC West or to win the Super Bowl, if you're making any of those bets, I feel like you're doing that on the back of Kellen Moore is going to take this offense to the next level. They're going to get that extra little bit of oomph out of Justin Herbert. He's going to become that much more aggressive, take more deep shots, make those field-flipping throws, and this offense is going to find another gear that just hasn't been there. Otherwise, the roster's pretty much the same. The only other thing I could say here other than Kellen Moore is for the first time in however long, the Chargers stay completely healthy. It feels like this team is just not only battling injuries, but injury riddled to the most extreme of any team in the NFL over the last 5 years. It feels like it happens year over year over year. So maybe you could say this is the year where they finally kind of figure out that injury bug. But I'm going to go with Kellen Moore because that's a little less variable and a little easier to predict that I think Kellen Moore will be an upgrade over Joe Lombardi. Then to the Raiders, I'll go supporting cast, man. If you were to take this supporting cast and, hey, we talked about Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers last year. If you were to just drop this exact same supporting cast, put it in Green Bay a year ago, if you had that time machine capability, I think people would be predicting the Packers to go to the Super Bowl. I think a lot of people would be, right? Because obviously Devontae Adams would be there. Jacoby Myers would be the best number 2 that Rodgers had with Devontae Adams and maybe since the beginning of, DA's run towards being one of the best wide receivers in football. Josh Jacobs, really solid running back. Probably maybe a little bit better than Aaron Jones, but you don't have the 1-2 punch of him and Dillon. But even Hunter Renfrow, too. That would have been one of the best number 3 options that Rodgers had during his time in Green Bay on top of, Myers and Devontae Adams being there. So I think the supporting cast is great. And that's what makes the Raiders so tough is because I want to look at that and I want to say, well, Jimmy Garoppolo can run that Josh McDaniels offense. And, dude, you got Devontae Adams, who I still think is either the best wide receiver in football or he's number 2. And Jacoby Myers, the 2. I'm loving that. He kind of just had to do his best in New England as the 1. Now he gets to be the 2, gets even easier matchups. You can move him inside and out. Okay, cool. I think he's going to be in a great spot there. Hunter Renfrow is just a slot machine, and it kind of feels like a perfect, Wes Welker-esque type of player to have in that New England-esque offense for McDaniels. And Josh Jacobs is a really good running back, and the offensive line kind of came together towards the end of the season. It just ultimately, I look at the other side of the ball in the defense, and we'll talk about this in the concern video, and it's just as much excitement as I have about the Raiders and what there could be there in that supporting cast to help buoy that offense and Jimmy Garoppolo, I look at a defense that it feels hard not to predict them giving up 28 a game at least. And I think this offense has the pieces to maybe go toe-to-toe for that, but then I come back to Jimmy Garoppolo is going to find a linebacker once a game. But anyways, I'm being too pessimistic here. The reason to be excited about this upcoming season for the Raiders is because, hey, Jimmy Garoppolo may not be great, but he gets to throw to Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Josh Jacobs, Hunter Renfrow. The offensive line's figuring itself out. They add a second-round tight end and Michael Mayer. Supporting cast, all things considered, is actually one of the better in the NFL. All right, on to the AFC North. Ravens got the new offense, and I put Todd Monken here, and I thought about just saying Todd Monken. We saw what he did with Stetson Bennett last year, which, I know it's college, and it's hard to translate what that's going to do for an NFL team making a change at OC. But Stetson Bennett was not the reason that the Bulldogs won the 2021 National Championship. Not by any stretch. But 2022, you could legitimately point to him as a reason why they were the best team in college football last year. And I think Monken deserves a lot of that credit, and some of it goes to Stetson Bennett as well. But just revamping this offense is key, not only because we saw what Monken did with Lamar, but we had seen the peak of the Greg Roman offense and what it does for Lamar Jackson. It was the 2019 MVP season. We already saw the peak. So I feel like you had to go find something different. If you've already seen the peak of what could be done in that system and it's not a Super Bowl, it's time to look elsewhere. So I love the aggressiveness and say, hey, good is not always good enough. We need to be great. So I really appreciate that. But also the reason I say new offense is you get back Rashad Bateman, which that's going to have a transformative effect as long as he's healthy, because he's certainly better than the wide receivers that Lamar was throwing to for a majority of last year. And then you add OBJ. And you add Zay Flowers. Now, no guarantee Bateman and OBJ even stay healthy, right? But at least having Zay Flowers there goes a long way. And the passing attack, the scheme, drawing guys open, and honestly just opening up the field. More 3 receiver sets, 1 tight end, 1 running back, spreading the field to then just naturally create more running lanes for Lamar Jackson. I think it naturally just gets more efficient just by changing it up versus the 2 tight ends, a running back and a fullback on the field, plus Lamar. I think Todd Monken's got the right idea for how to open up that offense. So I'm really excited to see what it looks like despite not being a Ravens fan. The Bengals, again, another cop-out one. Balanced roster, man. It's just the defensive line is like a B+. I can look at that, I'm like, that's a damn good unit. Linebacking room, yeah, I like that unit a lot. The secondary, as long as it's healthy, yeah, it's got some turnover at safety, but I still think that's a pretty good unit as well. Then you get to the offense, and it's like, the offensive line's been a work in progress, but I think the last 2 off seasons worth of work has now paid off. The wide receiver room's A+++++. Tight ends are serviceable. Joe Mixon's not a bad player, not by any stretch. And then Joe Burrow, when he's healthy, is a top 3 quarterback in the league. So there's just no one position group that you look at when checking out their depth chart and you say, that could cost them games. They just don't have that glaring weakness. So balanced roster, to me, I think is a huge reason to be excited. And on top of course, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, all those guys that can put up a ton of points. The Browns, I'll go Deshaun Watson because kind of like what we talked about earlier with the Bills, it can't be any worse than it was last year, right? Like, the Bills can't get any more injury prone in their secondary. And to me, Deshaun Watson, those last 6 games of last year when we got to see him play in Cleveland, it's like, okay, that felt like as bad as we've seen him play throughout his career. So odds are it's only going to be up from here. And then Jim Schwartz, because again, kind of like the same argument there, he can't be any worse as a DC than Joe Woods was. And that's not to totally throw Joe Woods under the bus. There were weeks where Cleveland's defense legitimately performed like a top 5, top 10 defense in the NFL, which when you look at the talent of the roster, yeah, maybe there wasn't always great defensive line help to aid Myles Garrett, and because of that, he was seeing double and triple teams week in and week out. But still, that was a defense that underperformed more often than not. But some weeks you'd see that top 5, top 10 potential. Jim Schwartz got a nice track record throughout multiple different stops in his career of being able to at least get an average defense out of sub-average, below average talent, or taking above average talent and making it great. So I think he's a really good DC. He knows how to scheme up pressure. They've now put in a ton of resources on that defensive line, plus still have a good secondary, have a couple of linebackers I'm excited about. So I think the pieces there, and now the change of DC is going to help take that unit to where it should be in that top 5, top 10 conversation. So if you're a Browns fan, Deshaun Watson can't play any worse. Jim Schwartz should turn that defense around, plus the investment she made on that D-line should be a really, really good unit on that side of the ball. Steelers, I'll go pass rush. Honorable mention to Kenny Pickett and pass catchers. That's literally the word for word, almost what I went with. I was a little too long, so that's part of why I didn't go with it. But honorable mention for a reason. Because, Pickett's look sharp. Pass catchers look great. Calvin Austin gets a big play touchdown. George Pickens making freak plays in practice, left, right, and center. Deontay Johnson, solid, stable, reliable. You know what you're getting out of him. Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, love that. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, really excited about what they're doing. And yeah, they're kind of creating a pseudo competition, but I don't really mind that. The offensive line feels like it's made progress. So, picking that supporting cast feels like it's come a long way, but there is also another offensive presence that will be in our concerns video, which, if you're a Steelers fan, you know. But I'll go with the pass rush, man, because, this is a team that over the last half decade to a decade, and obviously even before my lifetime, there was a brief period where they weren't, but, the heyday of the Steelers, and then over the last decade or so, Blitzburg has been in full effect, and they've been towards the top 5, top 10 in the league in sacks year in and year out. And there was a 3-year stretch, maybe it was 4, where they were by far and away leading the league in sacks. So, yeah, TJ Watt, as long as he's healthy, Cam Hayward, Alex Highsmith coming off a career year. Nick Herbig looks like a huge hit in the 4th round, which I wasn't a huge Herbig guy, but when the Steelers drafted him, I actually thought he was kind of the perfect guy to add in. So that's where, situation does matter a ton when it comes to the NFL draft and where fits kind of come into play. But also, someone like a Keanu Benton drafted in the 2nd round. Like that front 7, should be really, really good at generating a ton of pressure. And just when you have Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, that alone is going to generate a ton of sacks and a ton of pressure on opposing QB. So that's something I'm super excited about as a Steelers fan. Then we get on to the NFC side. Cowboys, it's a loaded defense, man. I mean, the corner tandem of Trevon Diggs, Stephon Gilmore, got to be pumped about that. Micah Parsons playing edge full-time, plus Tank Lawrence, plus Monty Smith, who we'll see. Maybe it's a work in progress there, but first-round D-tackle, plus Jonathan Hankins, plus Osa Odigizua, who's become a nice pass rusher from the middle. I mean, man, Sam Williams, another former day 2 pick. I mean, there's just a ton of options across that defensive line. Linebacker room still needs to be sorted out a little bit, but you got LVE back, which is a nice baseline. And then the secondary is headlined by 2 legitimate studs at corner. So, yeah, you got to be pumped up about that defense. And Dan Quinn, of course, one of the best DCs in the game. Giants, I'll go coaching staff because Brian Daboll, I think we saw the impact he makes on this Giants team, and he was a huge reason, maybe the big reason why the Giants came to the playoffs last year. Even with, win differential that's not great and playing a lot of one-score games. And obviously they were a team that not many people in the preseason were predicting getting into the postseason. So you've got to give a ton of credit there to Daboll. But also Mike Kafka and Wink Martindale. Kafka, to me, is probably a year or 2 away from landing a head coaching job, depending on what this offense looks like, considering what we saw to Daniel Jones having a career year, seeing Saquon Barkley get back on track. If Evan Neal takes a step forward and that offensive line looks good, he's going to get the credit for that, right? If the addition of Darren Waller pays off and Jalen Hyatt looks like a stud, again, he's going to get the credit for it, even though maybe, that should go to the front office. And then for Wink Martin on the other side, he's had countless head coaching interviews. He is widely seen as one of the best defensive coordinators in the game and just a master at his craft, really. The defense Wink Martindale wants to run, but he still runs it so well and coaches it so well that it doesn't really matter, and he still causes offenses issues. So that coaching staff, really from head coaching position to OC to DC, I mean, it's star-studded right now. Eagles, no roster holes, kind of the same thing we talked about with Cincy, balanced roster. There's just nothing you look at and say, yeah, that's going to cost them games. They got a couple of new starters, at right guard and linebacker, but Nakobe Dean looks like a freak, and I'm so pumped to see him as an every down starter. Cam Jurgens, I saw him center only, but we'll see how that plays out at guard. I'm not really concerned about it. This team just can win in such a variety of ways. Same thing we were talking about with Philadelphia all throughout last season. They're just such a well-balanced roster, so well-coached that no matter what the score is in the fourth quarter, I feel confident that Philadelphia's got a good chance at either holding on or making the comeback. Then we get to the Commanders. I'll go defensive line. Chase Young, big year for him. I think Montez Sweat's one of the most underrated players in football. Then you get to that interior. Deron Payne may have been paid a little too much for my liking, but he's still one of the best interior defensive linemen in football, so, can't have your cake and eat it too. Sometimes you got to make those hard decisions. And then Jonathan Allen, again, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. So, I mean, from left to right, and even some depth thereafter, that defensive line is juiced. The secondary, I'm waiting to see what it looks like specifically at corner. I have some trepidation there, but that defensive line, as long as it's healthy, will make that secondary look so much better, which in turn makes that defense look better, which in turn hopefully helps out first-year starter and Sam Howell win some close football games. All right, NFC South, the rushing attack. I mean, pretty straightforward here. That offensive line from left to right, except for Matt Bergeron, who's a rookie, all coming off career best years and, run block grade using PFF's data. Bijan Robinson, his first run of his career, looks like a guy who, has the talent of being a future Hall of Famer. I know it's a lot to say right now, but I think we're all kind of saying the same thing about Bijan, where it's like, barring any crazy career step backs, criminal or injury or whatever may come up, this guy plays 15 years in the league. He's probably going to Canton. And then Arthur Smith, the scheme itself. I mean, it made Derrick Henry super efficient. It had Tyler Algier run for 1,000+ yards last year. Now you plug Bijan into that. You add a guard in the second round, Matt Bergeron. Yeah, that run game should be crazy good. Carolina, Bryce in that defense. Bryce has got some work to do about elevating that wide receiver room, but I'm excited about what Frank Reich and some of the other offensive minds in that building can do to help him out and elevate that core around him. And that defense is good. I like Ajero Evero as a ton as a DC. Brian Burns is one of my favorite players in the league. You get Shaq Thompson back, Frankie Louvu coming off a breakout year. Have J.C. Horn, who, when he's healthy, could be a top 10 corner in the league. Also Jeremy Chin, who, still trying to figure out his role, but, playing in the nickel, I think, is that right spot. He'd be a tight end eraser after that. And I think he's a guy with a ton of upside there. So would love to see maybe even, this might be a little bit of a stretch, but kind of what they did with Justin Simmons last year. Maybe you could do some of that same stuff with Jeremy Chin. If you can't do it with him, you can do it with Von Bell, who is a solid, stable, consistent, and a really just plus-level football player across the board. Saints, I'll go Derek Carr. This is tough. My honorable mention here is their starting 22. I think you just look at their starters and you're like, yeah, this is a really well-balanced roster that can win in a lot of different ways. I could see this being a really, kind of a scrappy football team that, again, wins in different games. But their depth behind it's a little worrisome, and injuries going to eventually pop up. So I wasn't entirely sold on saying that, but I'll go Derek Carr, because I mean, this was a team that was pretty much week in, week out competitive with Andy Dalton, and Andy Dalton was pretty decent last year, but I think we all recognize he's not a top 32 quarterback in the league anymore. Like, he's just not one of those guys. He's just a plus level backup. Derek Carr is a top 32 quarterback in the league. So getting that, even if it's not Andy Dalton, Aaron Rodgers, or anything like that, Andy Dalton and Derek Carr is a pretty sizable step in the right direction. And if all else stays the same and all else can stay healthy on the rest of the starting 22, all right, this could be, there's a reason I picked them to win the NFC South. This should be the team that wins that division because everything else looks really, really good on paper. And Derek Carr is a huge reason why people are kind of picking them to win the division because, well, he's the best quarterback in the division as of right now. Then we get to the Bucs. The wide receivers, Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask. I'm not super confident about either one of those guys going to this season for various reasons. I think the defense could be pretty good. Todd Bowles always coaches it well on that side. But I know sometimes I get forgotten about, but Mike Evans just posts 1,000-yard receiving seasons left and right. I mean, this guy is just so consistent in that regard. And Chris Godwin, when healthy, one of the best slot wide receivers in football. And that's an awesome 1-2 punch. Then we'll see what happens after that. Trey Palmer's been making a ton of plays. I'm ready to see real game action to see if that's legit. Because if it is, that type of burner plus Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, that might be one of the most well-rounded trios the NFL has to offer. I'm not saying it's the best, but it might be one of the most well-rounded. So really hope to see that Trey Palmer hype is real once we get to the regular season. But just Godwin and Evans alone, I mean, come on, that's an awesome 1-2 punch. Yes, both kind of approaching the hill, and maybe Evans is starting to get to the point where he's a little over it. But still right now, it's a really awesome 1-2 punch there. Then we get on to the NFC West. Cardinals' new regime, a tough team to kind of pick out a reason for hope because, honestly, if you're an Arizona fan, I would hope that you're rooting for a 3-14 season. Try to pick number 1 overall. Hope Houston does the same thing and you got the number 2 pick as well. Like that's what would be my hope if I was a Cardinals fan. But you really just want to see that kind of new order, new tone kind of set in with Jonathan Gannon kind of echoing what we saw with Brian Daboll. I don't know if Gannon and company are going to have quite that same amount of effect or be able to carry a bad team into the postseason. I also think the Giants last year are better than the Cardinals this year, so it's apples to oranges there. But if you just even say, let's say the Cardinals go 4-13, they're not a very good team, but it just feels more put together. And I've already seen from Monty Ossenforth a much better offseason approach than what we ever saw from Steve Keim. Just from the NFL draft alone. It was like, this guy understands how to play the game here, and he's going to accumulate a ton of assets moving forward. And honestly, I feel way more confident Austin Ford, making those picks than I ever did with Keim, other than Kyler Murray layup pick at number 1. So you just got to be excited about the new way of doing business moving forward and what that means in 3 to 5 years long term for the Cardinals. The Rams, Kupp and Donald, and you throw Stafford in there, of course, as well. And frankly, it's because maybe this is the concern video portion coming out too. But outside of those two, it is just not very good. This roster really is not doing much for me other than those two guys who are bona fide superstars. But hey, they're hugging it for a Super Bowl win, and a lot of the same stuff could have been said about that roster. Granted, they had John Johnson III at kind of the peak of his powers, Von Miller on a kind of renaissance run, Joe Noteboom playing really, really well, Andrew Whitworth kind of getting some last hoorahs there. They had more than just those two. Right now it feels like it's just those two plus Stafford. So we'll see, but the fact that you at least have one of the best wide receivers, maybe the best defensive player in the league still in Aaron Donald on your roster should give you a lot of excitement. 49ers, Kyle Shanahan. Because, yeah, Brock Purdy's the starter. Sam Darnold was just announced as the number 2. We'll see what that means for Trey Lance. And maybe you have trepidations about any one of these guys. Maybe you think Lance should have been the guy because Purdy was a 7th rounder, or because Darnold's been bad everywhere he goes. Or maybe you think Darnold should be the guy, now he's got a shot. Whatever the case is. You feel somewhat confident that the 49ers are still going to be a good team no matter who that starter is because of Shanahan, his scheme, and his play calling. And it's just that simple. So, yeah, he's got to be the quote-unquote reason for hope. But the good news for 49ers fans is you could say Shanahan's the reason for hope. You could say Steve Wilkes as, the new DC. Not a huge loss considering D'Amico Ryan stepping out of that building is a big loss. That could be your reason for hope. It could be the pass rush. It could be another year of that secondary gelling together. I mean, there's so many different things. You could say it's Debo and Ayuk, full season of Christian McCaffrey, so many different things. I mean, it's just one of the best teams in football. So finding one reason for hope is a little tough. The Seahawks, I'm going to go the wide receivers. Yeah, JSN's going to potentially miss week 1. We'll see how long he ends up being out for. But just that trio, JSN, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. I mean, that's one of the best trios the game has to offer. And it helps Geno Smith be put in a situation where he can double down on what he did last year. Plus, the offensive line should be better from where it was last year. The running backs, you add Zach Charbonnet into the mix. Year 2, Kenneth Walker, that should be better as the course of the season plays out. Honestly, I'm kind of coming around to the idea that I think JSN might lead this team in catches. I think he legitimately might. I mean, he did at Ohio State with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson there, and it's because that offense basically took the approach of JSN's going to be the volume guy. Those other two guys are going to create chunk plays. And I mean, what better way of, kind of using DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett other than big play weapons, right? Like using them as catalysts to create 25 plus yard plays. And then let JSN do the other stuff. Kind of makes a lot of sense. I'm not saying he'll lead the team in yards because of that, but receptions, I can totally see that. But that's just such a nasty trio, and it helps Geno Smith try to double down on what he did last year. Last division to talk about, the NFC North. I mean, DJ Moore. And look, I'm not trying to throw Justin Fields in the bus. I've been excited. I've called him a breakout candidate. I think he does take a step forward this year. But just in that first preseason game, Justin Fields has 3 completions, all behind the line of scrimmage. 2 of them end up being a touchdown, right? Like, that's crazy. And that first play with DJ Moore taking it to the house is insane. And again, not trying to throw Justin Fields under the bus, but just taking it out of the NFL context. Let's just say I made that throw playing backyard football and my buddy took it to the house. The first thing I'd be saying is, dude, my bad. What an ugly throw. Thanks for, backpacking me. Thanks for letting me ride your coattails. Thanks for taking that to the end zone. And I'm obviously not an NFL quarterback, so the standards are much, much lower than for me compared to Justin Fields. So we'll see. I'm hoping that was just kind of a weird throw, whatever. It gets sorted out NFL regular season. He looks so much better. But DJ Moore, I mean, that's the impact that a number 1 wide receiver has. He can make the bad look okay. He can make the okay look good. He can make the good look great. And I think that's what you're going to get out of DJ Moore. Lions, improved defense, right? Like year 2, Aiden Hutchinson. If he is just the same guy he was week 10 through 18, that's a guy that's going to probably come close to 15-plus sacks this year. Another year of James Houston as well. Lee McNeil's growth. You add a first-round linebacker on top of year 2, Malcolm Rodriguez, re-signing Alex Anzalone. They did a ton to raise the floor of that secondary. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Emmanuel Mosley, Cam Sutton. They've done so much to make that defense. It's going to be hard, barring a crazy amount of injuries, see this team like below 20th in the NFL in yards and EPA and points per game, whatever metric you value the most. I have a hard time thinking the Lions are going to be 21st or below. So just raising that floor of that defense on top of what should be a really good offense means this team's going to win a lot of football games. Packers, year 2, Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. I think there's a lot of excitement about those guys. I know they each had their offseason hype last year, and I'm still optimistic about both from this year. Watson is the big play guy. Dobbs, hopefully, if he cleans up those drops, can be kind of the route running assassin. And it can almost play as they're very different body types and they're not the same receivers, but kind of what Cincinnati had with Chad Ochocinco, or Chad Johnson, pick your preference, and TJ Houshmandzadeh, where like Chad made the big plays and Houshmandzadeh was just the possession, kind of did the mundane stuff, the boring stuff, but moved the chains on 3rd and 8. And I think Dobbs could be that type of guy, move the chains, keep the offense flowing, and then Watson hits you for the big play and puts points on the board. Now, obviously, a lot of that's going to come down to Jordan Love. It's going to come down to Matt LaFleur calling the right plays and scheming it up and timing these guys up for their opportunities at the right chance. But all that out of, kind of all that the same. These two guys going to year 2, if they build upon and just tweak a little bit of some of what their issues were last year, namely drops, I mean, that could be a really fun 1-2 punch moving forward. And then the Vikings, Brian Flores. I've said this plenty of times on the channel. There was no bigger offensive coordinator leap in talent than Matt Patricia to Bill O'Brien. And maybe that should have been my reason for hope for New England. Definitely a good one. And then the same thing for the defensive side. No bigger leap was made than what Minnesota did from Ed Donatel to Brian Flores. There's just simply no bigger jump. And while the names on paper may be relatively equal in talent, it may not be a huge shift made and how much talent's on that side of the ball. I just think the Flores effect and how he coached those guys and the scheme itself will make a huge impact. And kind of like we talked about with the Bills and some of the other examples we used earlier, it's kind of hard to imagine this defense being as bad as it was last year because there is still some talent on there. So for this team, I think they were like 31st in EPA per play last year, 30th, something like that. Even if they get to 22nd, 21st, 20th, that's a big step in the right direction. And that offense, I think, is going to be just about as good as it was last year. So any marginal improvement they get on defense makes this team better than what it was overall last year. And honestly, I think the disconnect is for me predicting the Vikings to win the NFC North, where some teams are saying, well, they won too many one-score games. I think the improved defense will counteract that natural regression they'll have in one-score games. They're not going to go, what was it, like 9-1, 10-1 in one-score games, something ridiculous. they're going to lose more of those one-score games. But I think the defense can be better, so they might not be in as many one-score games. So I think it just kind of counteracts itself throughout the course of the season. But, guys, that is going to do it for today's video. I've given you one reason for hope or optimism for all 32 NFL squads. Let me hear your reasons for excitement and why your hopium is in the air for your favorite squad down below in the comments section. What has you pumped up about your team's chances going into this upcoming season? Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hit that like button if you did. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and want to see more football content like this as we get closer and closer to the NFL regular season getting underway. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Teach, and I'm signing off.